Paul Goldschmidt has found a new home with the New York Yankees. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Saturday, December 21st, 2024. It's been a hot minute since we've had an episode of the show. Had a lot going on last weekend and then got rocked this week by a virus that went through our household. Those daycare viruses don't mess around. I normally don't catch stuff like that, but I did this time. I'm feeling better, though, today, and we've got big news to talk about. As much as I'm going to soon jump on and get to the Nolan Arenado blocking a trade to Houston conversation that happened this week, breaking on Saturday is Paul Goldschmidt to the Yankees on a one-year deal worth $12.15 million. We're going to talk about our thoughts on that conversation and maybe even sprinkle a little bit of Arenado stuff in here, depending on how concise I can be with everything. But want to say real quick that this episode is brought to you by Smith Agri-Service and Revival LLC. Revival LLC specializes in passionately restoring log cabins to their former glory by studying traditional woodworking practices of the past and utilizing them in our modern world to create genuine, timeless beauty. Their focus is preserving these cherished values in existing structures, whether it be your log cabin or historic home, and elevating them to a higher standard. If you value craftsmanship, give Craft Revival LLC a call today. Their number is 573-366-6563. They specialize in log cabin repairs, maintenance, porch remodeling, historic millwork, and now offer new timber-framed construction. Keeping craftsmanship alive one project at a time since 2021, that's Craft Revival LLC. And Smith Agri-Service is a family-owned independent retailer providing farmers in Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa with competitive pricing on Corteva, b-schaeff, generic brand crop protection products, and Brevant corn and soybean seed. Scan the QR code on your screen there or text 202-988-1106, or you can email smithag@irtc.net. So exciting news, I suppose, if you're Paul Goldschmidt, if you're a Cardinal fan wondering where Goldy might potentially land, it's in a pretty good spot, if you ask my opinion. First of all, getting out of the National League helps anybody that's hoping to get to the World Series because the NL runs through the Dodgers right now. It's just inevitable. It's not getting any easier. They're continuing to add. It's interesting that teams like the Padres continue to load up as well when you think about how difficult it's going to be to unseat the Dodgers in the NL West. And look, I've talked about the disappointment probably from Cardinals fans at the direction of the team right now, at least at the major league level, the fact that they are not going to be striving at their utmost to be contending in 2025 with the way that they're spending their money. And certainly we have learned, even more so perhaps than we had been led to believe, that this Arenado thing is a salary dump. It is not part of the Cardinals trying to get some young prospects back and get better. They're trying to get the money off the books, plain and simple. And if they're not successful in doing so, as Derek Gould of the Post-Dispatch reported this week, they could then pivot to finding other avenues to get rid of some money. If they're stuck with Arenado because he blocked the trade to Houston, he's unwilling to go there, and the Cardinals might have had a deal either close to being finalized or one lined up, and they just needed his approval. And he said, nope, don't want to go there. Now, again, that was shortly after they had traded Kyle Tucker. So you wonder, did that change potentially the willingness Arenado might have had to go to Houston? If it's, okay, they're not really all in right now either. How do I view something like that after the move that they made? Did Arenado's camp originally tell the Cardinals, yeah, you can talk with Houston and we'll see, but then that changed after Tucker was dealt to the Cubs? Like, I don't necessarily know what the thought process was there. It is certainly strange when you think about, okay, he gave you a list of however many teams that he'll accept a trade to. If the Astros weren't on it, why are you engaged with them? But it might not have been so hard and fast as to the way those negotiations went. So I'm not really going to get too deep into that speculation in this episode. I want to focus a little bit more on Goldschmidt and the general direction of the team. But yeah, it is a little bit strange the way that went down, and thinking that the Cardinals might have had a soft landing spot for him, and he said no thanks. So now the Cardinals are still kind of stuck with him. And as Derek Gould reported, if the Cardinals cannot find a way to get rid of Arenado to somewhere that he's willing to go, to a team that's willing to eat a big chunk of the money, and I believe the Cardinals were prepared to eat, according to reports, 15 to 20 million of Arenado's remaining 70-ish million, which would have left about 50 million for the acquiring team, the Astros in that case. And that was the deal that was nixed. And then the Astros turn around and they signed Christian Walker to a $50 million contract. So for those wondering, could the Astros still be in for Arenado, because Katie Woo had reported it was more of a not right now from Nolan's camp than a never this offseason going to be willing to go to Houston. It's a never at this point because the Astros said, well, for us, it is never. It's not a we're going to let you string us along, and if you find a better date to the dance, you're going to say yes to them instead of us. No, if you're saying maybe to us now, we're going to take that as a no, and we're going to sign Christian Walker and move on. No, there's no room for the Astros to bring in Arenado, in my opinion, because they still have Isaac Paredes that they picked up, and I believe that was the Kyle Tucker trade, and there's got to be somewhere for Paredes to play. They've got Altuve at second. I assume Jeremy Pena would continue to play shortstop. Christian Walker then ends up fitting in as the first baseman, and Paredes presumably would play a good deal of third. Maybe there's a DH in there that they're willing to maneuver around, but I would have to imagine with Yordan Alvarez, he's not an everyday outfielder by any stretch of the imagination. That ends up being Alvarez's spot more often than not. So I feel like 1-for-1, Walker was a replacement for the Astros not being able to land Arenado. They would have rather had maybe the premium defensive positioning, and if it was going to be about similar on the cost, they would have preferred Arenado. But Arenado was in a position where he said, I don't want to do it yet, because he's basically, like I kind of framed it before, waiting, in my opinion, for somebody else to ask him to the dance that he'd rather go with. That can blow up in his face. It certainly can blow up in the Cardinals' faces. I would have to imagine the Cardinals are not thrilled with the way that Arenado has handled this. But should we be that surprised necessarily with the fact that he kind of forced his way out of the Rockies in the first place, got his money, but then said, I don't want to stay? Look, we were all on his side with that because the Rockies are not a well-run organization, and he basically kind of had the Rockies' hands tied behind their backs saying, I want to go to the Cardinals. You got to figure out a way to work it out with them. The Cardinals had the leverage in that case, right? Because they were able to say, hey, we don't want to take on all the money, but we'll take on a significant chunk of the money, and we also don't want to give you premium prospects. And the Rockies said, fine, we'll pay down $50 million of the contract, and we'll take the guys that you're willing to give us, because that was where Arenado wanted to go. They were the ones that were kind of at the mercy of what Arenado wanted. Now the shoe is on the other foot. The Cardinals are at the mercy of what Arenado wants, and they're trying to work with him. It seems as though he's got all the leverage and the team has none, and I would say that it publicly gets out that he blocked the Houston trade only adds to that reality that the Cardinals are not in the primary position right now when it comes to leverage, but it could still work out. The problem is it seems like right now the Dodgers want to stick with Max Muncy as their third baseman, so the place that would be the most obvious for Arenado to go doesn't seem to be a high-quality option unless they change their tune on that. I know I've ended up talking more Arenado than Goldschmidt right now, but it is kind of one in the same, right? Because there is a chance that Arenado ends up now with the Yankees, I suppose, to pair up with Goldy once again. The Goldy deal for $12 million, just a one-year contract, is a very low-risk acquisition by the Yankees, and I think it's a great signing. I think it's a move that is exactly what Goldschmidt needs and exactly what the Yankees need. It is one of those markets where, like, if he stinks up the joint, he's probably going to take on a lot of criticism, but I think people would understand, too. It's not like they have invested in a multi-year commitment to Paul Goldschmidt. This is a sign to me, like, instead of going to, like, I don't know if the Astros were an option for Goldy or if Christian Walker, who had a better season in 2024, was their preference, because obviously Christian Walker ended up with a much larger contract, $50 million on a 3-year deal compared to just 1 year at 12. I thought Astros would have been a great fit for Goldy because of the Houston connection. That's where he's from. And it, would have fit in with them, maybe trying to resolve some payroll issues potentially. I didn't really understand the Tucker trade from their perspective, but if they don't think they can sign him, maybe that was part of the reason. They just wanted to get something a little more sustainable over the coming years for him, and I think Paredes is under control for a little bit longer. But nevertheless, with the Houston thing not happening, I think that the Yankees is a really good fit. He could have gone somewhere else, probably gotten a little bit more money, I would have to imagine, and maybe even a second year. But this is a 1-year bet on myself. I'll turn 38 in September, and then if I perform, I've got every opportunity potentially to continue my career and maybe sign another 1-year deal for a larger amount, or maybe a multi-year deal to get me to age 40 if I'm Paul Goldschmidt. And also with the Yankees, you have a really decent chance to get to the World Series and a decent chance to win a ring. Paul Goldschmidt wants to win, man. He is as competitive as anybody. You may not always get that sense because he doesn't stand in the clubhouse and talk bombastically about things when things are going poorly, and he's not that most outspoken type of guy. But Paul Goldschmidt puts in the work to win and to be great, and he wants it. So I think the Yankees is a good landing spot for him because they do. They have a good team. They have an ownership willing to spend, and I think it ends up being a really nice fit for him. And then I do kind of wonder, is there a world in which you could see Nolan Arenado potentially link up there, because the Yankees are one of those teams that we generally think having unlimited money. and the payroll and the luxury tax and all of those rules that might apply when an Astros signs a Christian Walker, I say, they're probably not going to then, go after an Arenado in a trade as well and spend another $50 million on something like that. I think the Yankees, the Dodgers are in this category, are one of those few teams where you can look at it and say, maybe anything could still be possible. But I love the fit for Paul Goldschmidt. Like, the ballpark, I think, leans a little bit more toward you'd rather be a lefty hitting there in Yankee Stadium, right, because of the short porch in right field. I feel like that's what we always think of, but Yankee Stadium is another great place to hit for righties. I think Goldschmidt is going to have a great year. I don't know if he's going to be like 2022 MVP, but don't you just see the Yankees being the organization going, we'll throw Paul Goldschmidt $12 million. It's literally Paul Goldschmidt. This guy is a potential Hall of Famer. He's on the decline a little bit right now and didn't have this was his first in 2024, his first sub 100 OPS plus. And what that means is his first year where he was basically a below league average hitter. With the offense that he produced, 98 was the OPS plus according to Baseball Reference. I'd pull up Fangraphs, but I would assume it's somewhere in that vein where consistently throughout his career, Paul Goldschmidt is a well above average producer offensively, and this was the first time that he wasn't. The Yankees are going to get him for a song as a result of that, and I think if I set the over-under at that 810 OPS that he had in 2023 with the Cardinals, I would probably take the over. And that might be a little bit aggressive, because he was all the way down to a 716 OPS this past season. He went down nearly 100 points, and that was on the heels of going down 171 points of OPS from his MVP season in 2022 when he had a 981 OPS, had a 317 batting average, led the league in all these categories. Slugging led the league, OPS led the league, ended up with 35 home runs, 115 RBIs, which is the third most in his career. Like, he was unbelievable. And then we've seen stark decline consecutive years in a row for Paul Goldschmidt. I think the Yankees are getting him at the right time. I think he's motivated. I think as much as, like, you could look at the scenarios of the veterans in the clubhouse and sort of say, should they take some of the blame for the way things did not stay on track for the Cardinals this past year and even back into 2023? While that can be a fair argument to make, I also am not going to say, like, Paul Goldschmidt was a problem in the Cardinals clubhouse. No, I think the problem, and Goldy would probably be the first to tell you, that revolves around Goldy and the Cardinals the last year or two was his production, like his numbers on the field. He didn't hit well enough for being the type of character that he was supposed to be. He was a main character in this lineup, as was Nolan Arenado, and those guys didn't perform as well. I don't think that it is an indictment on Paul Goldschmidt in the clubhouse or any of that, but I also could see when things don't go well, it's human nature to have it impact us personally. And then a guy like Goldschmidt, who cares as much as he does, I think starts to put more pressure on himself to maybe internally start to ask those questions like, am I doing enough? And I don't know that this is maybe a fair characterization, because I think he's very comfortable with who he is and knows that he's always is putting his best foot forward and doing everything he can to win. But again, like I said, I think it's human nature to kind of wonder, like, should I be doing this, or is there pressure on me to be this guy in the clubhouse that has to be this vocal leader that's really not my forte? Do I have to change who I am to meet the needs of the club at the time? I think when you get him into New York in an environment where there are those sort of larger-than-life personalities already on the team, he's going to be able to blend in really nicely and just go to work. And it's not that that's something he couldn't do in St. Louis, but I think when things were going wrong, as somebody in the local media and you have a bad game, you go down to the Cardinals clubhouse and you go, all right, nobody really wants to talk about this because it's the third one this week where things just aren't going well. But, Goldy is kind of that de facto leader of the team. Maybe he'll say something and we'll get a chance to talk to Goldy, because like you don't want to bother the same guys every day, but also there were only a number of veterans on the position player side. Like the pitchers, you talk to the pitchers every time they start, and it was a group of veterans largely, and so you're going to get those guys to, nobody's shirking those responsibilities. And it's not that the other players would either, but like just naturally you turn to the guys that are sort of the leaders in times of trouble for a team. You want to hear from the guys that are presumably in those de facto leaders in the clubhouse, if that makes sense. And so that ends up falling on Goldy's shoulders, I think, more often than it's going to in a New York environment. Is that to say he wasn't up to that task? No, that's not what I'm trying to say. I just think it's a more friendly environment to a player that's just trying to go to work, do his business, and help a team win. And I think Goldschmidt is going to be really well suited to that environment for New York, and I'm going to be rooting for the guy. For those Cardinals fans that, the Yankees are that big brand and they've got the most all-time world championships, and so people just feel the way that they might feel about the big bad New York Yankees. I know they haven't won a World Series in a while, so that sort of intrinsic hatred may have faded for some people, but whether you have that or not, I think Paul Goldschmidt's a guy you still root for. The biggest travesty of the entire operation, though, to me, is that Goldy's going to have to shave his beard. I just think it doesn't look like the same guy without facial hair, right? Maybe he'll go the route of Matt Carpenter, though, and do the mustache thing. And I'll bet you, too, something that you might end up hearing as Goldschmidt ends up getting introduced by the Yankees and he'll talk to the media over there. I'll bet you Matt Carpenter had a say in this as well. And just in terms of Goldy making a decision and somebody who takes obviously that very seriously for his family and wants to be in the right place for him and his people and how were you treated with New York? And obviously Goldschmidt was somebody that stumped for Carp to come into the Cardinals clubhouse last spring and then ends up now going to a place that Carpenter kind of revitalized his career when he joined the Yankees for a short time a couple of years ago. So I'm sure that those were some conversations that were had between those two veterans, if I had to imagine. A lot of mutual respect there, and I would think that Carpenter was probably, if not outright consulted, I bet there was a conversation between Goldy and Carp of just like, how was it in the Yankees organization? How they treat you? What was it like? Do you think I would look good with a mustache? Those sorts of things. I think Goldy should go for it. I think he should go for the mustache move rather than just the clean-shaven look. But let me know, Cardinals fans, what do you think about Paul Goldschmidt ending up with the New York Yankees? I think it's a great fit. And look, it's a tough day because this officially means he's not coming back with the Cardinals, but we knew this for a long, long time. It was said even if it wasn't said, right? Okay, Wilson Contreras, he's going to be moving to first base. There was just no world in which Goldschmidt was going to come back to the Cardinals this offseason. It's unfortunate. It stinks because I think when he signed his extension after the Cardinals traded for him ahead of the 2019 season, it would have been an upset to suggest that he would end his career anywhere but the Cardinals because it, from day one, felt like such a perfect fit. Paul Goldschmidt, St. Louis Cardinals, he was one of those guys that felt like he was a Cardinal before he ever was one, right? And he was a consummate professional while he was here. He was a great performer while he was here. He wins his MVP award while he was here. I know that the last season, and you could even say 2023, was not what everybody hoped or expected that it would be, but I don't think there should be any ill feelings from Cardinals fans when it comes to Paul Goldschmidt. Having been around him, covering this team, I think he was the kind of guy that everybody ought to have been proud of to have on the Cardinals and the kind of guy that you want to root for. A lot of people would say, don't really care what kind of guy he is, what are his numbers, but he met that bar as well, right? With a 981 OPS and an MVP in 2022, he was the best of both worlds until he, had the bit of a decline. And is this something where he can rejuvenate? I think yes, because when you look at his numbers last year, you can isolate by kind of playing around with the game logs, and this is selective endpoints, and it may not be super indicative of what a player is or is supposed to be, or you can expect to be moving forward. But he had a really rough April, had a rough go in kind of the early portion of May, and then, as we did many times last season, talked about the turnaround right around Mother's Day. Mother's Day was a good game for Goldy, so we'll go selective endpoints. I think that might have been his lowest, or actually, the day before Mother's Day was his lowest point of the season, I think, in terms of OPS, at a 530 OPS. I'll take it from Mother's Day forward and just tell you what his numbers were. 774 OPS. I think that was identical to Arenado's OPS for the season, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to take a look at that. But that's sort of like, okay, he had a really rotten 6 weeks to begin the season. 2023 OPS for Arenado was 774. That's why that number stuck in my mind. He was a 719 this past season. Him and Goldy had basically identical OPSs. They were both about league average offensive players coming off of MVP candidacies 2 years previous. Is not what you want. But it's interesting that Goldschmidt, from mid-May to the end, while there were some pockets in there where he wasn't productive, totaled out to be a 774 OPS, which was like 2023 Arenado. Disappointing, but not as bad as it felt at times. And I remember going back through the game logs last year, you can find stretches where Goldy, here, I'll start it in May, and I'll just find how many 0 for stretches he had in terms of games in a row. He didn't, from May the 12th, all the way down to find the first stretch where he went 3 games in a row without collecting a hit. And that's like 3 games in a row, that's a series, right? You'd have to go all the way to July 14th, which was before the All-Star break, and then the doubleheader right after the All-Star break, July the 20th, where he had the first 3-game stretch since the 12th of May of an offer in 3 games in a row. And then it was August, and that was just 3 games. August 2nd through the 6th, he had a 5-game stretch where he didn't get a hit. And then you'd go down to the end of the year, September 14th to the 17th, he had a 4-game stretch where he didn't get a hit. That was it. Otherwise, he was basically piling up on-base streaks and hitting streaks, kind of like a bunch. He just didn't quite have as much power, and you bake in those 3 just dud periods of his season, and that's how you end up with the lesser numbers. But I would say for the majority of the season, last 4.5 months or so, Goldy was not Goldy, but he was fine. He wasn't as bad as it felt like he was if you go back and look at the game logs. It's for all those reasons, the reasons that I think the Cardinals environment just got to be but maybe I'm not even going to blame anybody specifically. It just felt like it was a little bit stale because for 2 years in a row, the expectations were there and the production and the playoffs weren't. And so that can be something that wears on people. Change of scenery can often do wonders for a player. I think it's going to do wonders for Paul Goldschmidt. And I think he ends up being in a really good position now to succeed with the Yankees. And like I said, I really do feel like it was an upset. If you would have even said at the beginning of the season, I remember back to the offseason when it was rumored that the Cardinals were trying to extend Paul Goldschmidt, and then, that was coming from one report that it was all right, really? Why would they do that right now? This could be the Michaelis thing all over again. You've already seen a little bit of a decline from Goldy. Is there really any need to do this now? And then next time you kind of heard about it, the reporting changed, and it was, they're going to wait. But they're going to wait for mutual reasons. That was the polite way to phrase it, but the real reason that you were waiting is because they needed to see Paul Goldschmidt be Paul Goldschmidt again before they wanted to dive in, because it's a business, and that made sense. But I think even at that point, it would have been an upset to see Goldy leave, because I wouldn't have expected another stark decline. I would have expected another 800 OPS in 2024 or a 790 where it was good enough to where you go, all right, we'll let you go to free agency for a minute because we're going to decline your salary for sure, kind of like they did with Adam Wainwright back when. And we're going to sign you to a 2-year extension with a bunch of incentives, and you're going to finish out as a Cardinal. It still felt like, to me, that was the way that this was all going to go down, even at the beginning of 2024. I call it an upset that he's not finishing his career as a Cardinal because of how perfect it felt. But it was a perfect storm. His stark decline comes in conjunction with the Cardinals deciding that they need to go in a different direction. And look, the chicken or the egg, which came first? Did the Cardinals decline because their star players, Goldie, Arenado, didn't perform up to expectations? Or was it all the infrastructure problems and the fact that they couldn't develop some of these young guys to the level that they needed as quickly as they needed with the way that they were doing things organizationally throughout the minors and et cetera? Probably a combination of a lot of factors that led the Cardinals to say, we're declining payroll, we're going to reduce it this year, we're going to add infrastructure, which to their credit they've done. They've announced that Chaim Bloom's taken over. For the people that just dislike Mo Zalak and won't ever credit Mo for anything that he does, which he's had a long, successful tenure, things have gotten stale. I agree that it's time to move on. They're going to do that when it comes to Chaim Bloom next year. All these things are in place, but they're adding the Rob Serfolios. They're adding the coaching throughout the organization that I think they need to take the organization back to the next level when Chaim Bloom takes over in 2020 at the end of 2025 and moves this thing into the future. We're just in a little bit of a weird holding pattern for what's this season going to bring. And the fact that they had to resort to that decision and to that place is just ill-timed with Paul Goldschmidt's decline, because all the tough decisions that they're making that are led by business and led by money rather than, and by the way, you can throw in the uncertainty with Ballet Sports / FanDuel TV into the conversation as well, because that is a revenue-driven conversation and it's impacting the revenues. Not as significantly as it was maybe once feared to have done, but they didn't know that until they knew it. They didn't know that until they got that new contract resolved. So all that being said, it's just bad timing and it's a shame. It kind of strikes me as just one of those, butterfly effect, get into an alternate universe. There's a parallel universe where Paul Goldschmidt finishes as a Cardinal, gets a red jacket. Still kind of think he ends up as a red jacket guy, but let me know your thoughts on that, Cardinals fans. You're the ones that'll ultimately end up voting on that. 6 years with the Cardinals, 153 home runs, 470 some odd RBIs in his career with St. Louis. Obviously, the playoff production doesn't end up being a glowing bright spot on his resume, because the Cardinals get there in 2019, they get there in 2020, but it's a short stint in that case. Was it the NLCS in 2019, the Padres series in the COVID season of 2020? You get ousted in the first round. You get there in 2021. It's the same story with the wild card game against the Dodgers, where again, the offense did not produce. And then 2022, you have the Phillies series, wild card series, bounced in the first round again. So, like, playoff stuff is not going to be something that I think Cardinals fans look kindly upon when they look back on Paul Goldschmidt's tenure. But that's just the nature of what the team has been for the last handful of years, right? Like, I don't think you can. I'm not going to look negatively and remember Goldschmidt negatively because of that. But I think it is one of those things where you say, if the playoff success had been there, would there have been enough juice to keep him a Cardinal for the rest of the way as he looks to, how many more years do you want to continue playing? I think that's probably a fair assessment. And, maybe there would be the same conversation with Arenado, but that's obviously the one that's looming the most, the largest right now, with the Cardinals having to make a decision, and Arenado, honestly, having to make a decision. After blocking the trade to Houston, what does the future bring for him? Can the Cardinals get something done? If they do, it's going to be, like, think about the Bellinger trade that happened recently where he's traded to the Yankees as well. And again, I think Arenado could still go to the Yankees as long as he's on the list, which I think he is. Boston could be an option. I still am going to be, beating the drum for Philly because I think Alec Boehm would actually be a good Cardinal. I know everybody says, oh, Nolan Gorman's going to be the third baseman. Yeah, he probably is. But I also think Alec Boehm would fit in nicely with where the Cardinals are at. And I that's a gut call. That's not like based on anything I know to be true about Alec Boehm, other than the Phillies think he's a problem in the clubhouse, which almost tells me, good, bring him to the Cardinals and let him have a fresh start. Because sometimes when a young guy is characterized as a problem in the clubhouse, sometimes that's just environment. That maybe is something where he needs a fresh start as well to be able to assimilate better with some of the guys that are going to be calling themselves his teammates. You've got Bryce Harper in that clubhouse. Sometimes that can be a domineering force. I'm not saying Bryce Harper's a bad guy, but sometimes you maybe just don't get on well with your teammates. And I would wonder if Alec Boehm could be somebody that could use a fresh start, and maybe the Phillies would be interested in Arenado, and the Cardinals would have to eat less money as a result because Boehm is getting paid, and so the Phillies wouldn't be on the hook for that money, that sort of idea. But anyway, where do you want Arenado to land? Do you think the Cardinals are going to be able to unload him? And what do you think about Paul Goldschmidt ending up with the New York Yankees on a one-year contract? I think it's great for Goldy. I think it was inevitable that he was leaving the Cardinals, so, might as well get him into the American League where he can have a better chance of reaching the World Series. Cardinals taking this little reset, coinciding with the Dodgers taking over the sport. Again, I'm not saying it's great, but it's also maybe not the worst timing in the world to do it when you consider how difficult it's going to be to get to the World Series if you're an NL team the next few years. Smith Agri-Service and Craft Revival LLC presented this episode of B-Schaeff Daily. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. Now that I'm healthy, going to try to get back to more regular episodes as hopefully news continues to happen, too, that we get to talk about. So thank you guys for supporting, as always, the channel here on YouTube and for following B-Schaeff Daily on Spotify. That'll do it for this edition. We'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.